Good afternoon, and welcome to today's episode of Chat with Chet. I am joined today by Adam Rosenbaum from Tricentis to talk about I would say, some modern testing for government IT projects. And maybe, Adam, why don't you go and take just a minute, introduce yourself, and give us a little bit about your background, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Yeah, thanks, Chet. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Again, I'm Adam Rosenbaum. I'm the director of public sector, specifically Fed, DoD, and aerospace and defense sales at Tricentis. And we're a software test automation company. And what we do is we do all things software test automation, from test management to the actual automation of the testing, API testing, data integrity testing, and load testing for any application out there. So over 160 technologies. Main partners are SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, Workday, as where we see the most amount of activity with our current government customers. However, we work a lot in the customized application space as well. And the reason being, as you know, most folks are going through modernization processes right now, whether that's a lift and shift to cloud, maintaining a hybrid environment, or just doing major upgrades on their systems to be more efficient and get better economies of scale as technology continues to get better. Tricentis works with our customers to ensure that that's a smooth, easy transition and has a continuous testing plan in place to maintain and support the lifecycle of those applications. From a background perspective, I've been at Tricentis about 2 years. And prior to that, I've worked in cybersecurity and networking, and am a former active duty Army officer.
Oh, fantastic. Appreciate that. And again, appreciate you taking the time to talk today. You've been at Tricentis for a while now, and I think there's a lot of change going on in government software development and how they're doing things. I'm curious, from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest shift in how government agencies are approaching software testing today?
Yeah, that's a great question, because in the past, software testing has almost been an afterthought, mainly because there's so much work involved in rolling software out. And that software testing piece kind of gets looked at the end versus the beginning of a project. And what we're seeing is a gigantic shift in that approach and that project management style, because everyone's trying to, as you hear all the time, shift left, integrate with CI/CD pipelines, do the type of work that saves a lot of headache, a lot of extra unforecasted spend on the back end by testing twice and cutting once, if you will. So that's the major shift. Additionally, what's driving a lot of demand and need really is that shift to cloud or maintaining a hybrid environment, as folks are rolling out more modern versions of traditional applications that are used in everyday enterprise business services, thinking from financial management, supply chain management, human resource management, all those different functions. They're so integrated with so many different technologies across somebody's ecosystem. Things can go wrong at all times, and uptime is such an important factor that now software testing has come to the forefront for everything you can think of. Patch management, right? Updating a patch on your system could break 3-4 things down the value chain on that software stack. So that's really where we're seeing the big shift. And that's where we're spending the most of our time working with customers, is prepping for that sort of lift and shift or that modernization effort.
Fantastic. And you started off and you mentioned it, right? There is a lot of effort, a lot of talk around ERP modernization, right? We've seen a lot of stuff in the press around Navy ERP and
Yep.
Even other things. There's a lot of stuff going on with Oracle and other things. So maybe let's spend a few minutes talking about those efforts and testing specifically in these efforts. So obviously we get it. Software testing is important, but when we think about this concept of ERP modernization, why is the function of testing a critical path activity? Why
Yeah.
do we
So
care?
yeah, I think the big why do we care is the amount of inputs that go into an enterprise resource planning system. It's got multiple data inputs from older kind of legacy technologies to newer technologies that are kind of coming out. Think like agentic AI, the different AI tools that are starting to roll out. And those functions that those systems traditionally have done are now modernizing, and that's changing business processes, that's changing workflows, that's changing network connections. It's impacting the entirety of that IT ecosystem. So the ERP modernizations, whether it's SAP Rise or it's EBS Diffusion on Oracle, those are the two big ones we see. There's just so many moving parts that if you don't iterative test, if you don't build and deploy with testing and integrate into that CI/CD pipeline where you're going from the test environment to production, folks generally add time onto the actual deployments to get to production. And additionally, it consumes a lot of human resources, and it's traditionally been very manual. But now with tools like Tricentis, you can automate that to reduce that timeline to getting to production or reduce that timeline to validating the workflow. And it just rolls out faster. I wish I had a more eloquent way of saying it, but the further left you test, the faster you can go live. And then that reduces a lot of the human spend because testers aren't just testers. They're people doing the transactions daily. There's user testing, there's functional there's all sorts of different testing scenarios, and automating that makes organizations more efficient, more agile, and identifies defects in the process much, much faster.
Yeah, and I wonder if people don't necessarily understand the scale of some of these ERP systems. These are massive in
Yes.
terms of what they do, the data they have, the connections they have. And so the modernization efforts, this is no small task. We think about, we hear about this all the time, right? Modernization and everybody's focusing on ERP modernization. I think you've hit on this, but if you were to look back and say some of these bottlenecks that are really holding organizations back in their modernization efforts in these areas, what is that? What are you seeing there in that context?
From a bottleneck perspective, it could be as simple as I don't have enough people to test all the test cases. I have to build the test cases. Generally, in the past, when we go into an organization, we generally see folks managing testing on a spreadsheet, right? Where there's no, source of record. There's just a literal Excel spreadsheet on a laptop,
Mm-hmm.
and folks are manually creating test scripts with either open source tools or these legacy tools that have been around since the late 90s. So the big bottleneck we see is how do you create a test case? How do you manage it? And then how do you keep it updated so that if a business process changes or there's a patch change or any change in the ecosystem, maybe Adobe has an update. Well, how does that impact my SAP or Oracle instance if I have to be able to take a transaction and put it into a PDF file, right? We tend to look at it and say, hey, our process works a little bit better because we're managing it from a source of record, which is one of our products, Qtest. And then we can build reports, we can track it. We have one source of record, right? And in the past, that hasn't been there. That's been, when we see people say, I want to get automated, that's step one. It's just, how do I see myself? And that's probably one of the most important things an organization can do. The second bottleneck, the probably even bigger than that, to be honest with you, is how do I automate all this stuff? Because if I'm writing test scripts and automating it with an open source free tool, I have to go back in and I could have 3, 4, 5,000 test cases. I got to go update each one of those. So the common theme we see from folks is, yeah, we're automating, but we're not really automating because we'll get done in 2 or 3 months, and then we have to start all over. With folks and Jidik at DISA had a great article they pushed out, is what was taking 3, 4, 5 weeks to update an test automation case. Now they're doing it in an hour, 2 hours, and moving that cycle down from a 21-day test cycle to a 3-hour test cycle. So those bottlenecks are what drives cost, defects, and makes it incredibly inefficient. But the technology is now there, and I think at a point, and we keep, we're investing in AI. Our agentic AI tool just released on the commercial side. We're looking at different ways to speed that up so that organizations can manage this process and it not be 20, 30, 40% of a rollout from a time management perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned this a few minutes ago. You talked about CI/CD pipelines, and when I hear that, right, I think of the buzz, DevSecOps. And I say it's a buzzword, but it really is everywhere, and people are still talking about that. So I still believe this is, DevSecOps is out there, and quite a few organizations are trying to employ that. But I think integrating the whole concept of continuous testing into these CI/CD pipelines is still a challenge for a lot of these organizations. So, if you, from your perspective, how do you see agencies shift from these traditional testings to this continuous testing practice? Right? What are sort of some of the things they should be thinking about to get what you just talked about, shifting left and getting it so that it's actually automated?
Yeah. I mean, I honestly, Chet, we always recommend starting with how are we doing it today? Understanding what's happening right now and identifying tasks that you can quickly change. Because, in the words of one of our customers, a 50% solution now is better than a 0% solution later. Right. So our intent is we scope small and scale big, scale fast. So we look at, okay, how are you doing test management? Okay, how does that integrate? Are you integrated with Jenkins or Azure? What are those tools you're using? And we align our capability to those tools. We integrate in with those tools. I'm not aware of a DevSecOps pipeline we can integrate with. If someone else knows, I'm sure they'll tell me after watching this. But that's generally what we do: is we identify the tools being used. We figure out where is the biggest payoff. Is it CI/CD pipeline the first task we should do? It depends. But by identifying that, seeing yourself up front, you can start to make those decisions, and you can quantify those decisions as to where you can get value fast. So that's generally what we do. So if we see like, hey, you're using Jenkins or Git or something like that, it's just integrating the basics in test management. Okay, now I know what's going on. I have a repository now of what occurred in that DevSecOps pipeline. I can see where the defects are. I can push it back for someone to make a change, and then I can go back through the process. And then from there, I can automate that, right? So that I'm not manually doing it all the time. I can turn that into a normal business process of automation, and then go out and test it at load and see, how does that impact, my production environment. If it's, enterprise user, 500,000 people using it at once or 20,000 people using it at once, that's what we'll test. That's what we'll figure out. And we'll see the degradation to basically get to the point of what's supposed to happen and what actually happened.
Yeah, and I think organizations who can get to that point, right, that gives them what we can call it real-time validation readiness, right? If
Right.
they're able to put that in their pipeline and things come out of that pipeline and that testing is integrated into that, they can get that warm fuzzy that, hey, what comes out of this pipeline is ready to go into production. And I think there's huge value for organizations to start thinking that way.
Yeah. Yeah. We generally see, I keep saying generally, but it is because every organization has a lot of the same processes, a lot of the same tools, but they're managed a little bit differently. To your point, some are all the way down to agile methodology, some are just starting that process. So we try to tailor it and tailor our engagements, like I kind of said before. Let's see ourselves first. What do we look like right now? I think that's the most important part of any leadership activity, because when you're implementing such higher fidelity test program, right? That's an organizational culture change. That's a managerial change in how you're doing business. So I don't think you can do a great job of implementing that and deploying that methodology without first identifying what you look like, and then what is the vision of where you want to be, so that all personnel are kind of marching on the same path to the same outcome.
Yeah, so you mentioned cultural change, so let's maybe pull on that thread for just a minute. What are these hurdles? There's these culture's so embedded, right? So if you think about these cultural hurdles that organizations are trying to get over to transform their overall approach, whether it be to testing or just even how they just build deploy software. I'm curious. You talk to a lot of people. What are the biggest hurdles that these agencies are struggling with?
I think it's a couple combinations of things. But first and foremost, it's, most organizations in the federal government, and it doesn't matter if they're DoD, Civ, even down in the state and local level, there's generally not a big group of testers. You have the business users are doing the functional testing, right? But you got to get to functional testing. So one of the biggest changes we see is now we've inserted a process where we can simplify getting to user acceptance testing or different types of testing. We've simplified that and automated that process. So now maybe where I needed 40 people, now I may not need 40 people. Now I may be able to do it 2 or 3. And that's pretty critical, because now I've got I've opened up my resources to focus on their mission, on their core tasks, not these ancillary or secondary tasks, which are still very important. So working with folks to kind of see that and visualize that and how that impacts their workload, how that impacts their project scheduling. That is a big change. I think we'll see that. Doesn't matter if it's software test automation, it's any automation effort will change how those organizations not only see themselves, see their value, but also manage their workload. And that to me is some of the most critical path of getting one of these efforts started. And frankly, you run into some friction there because we've always done it this way. Got it. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. But these new processes, these introductions of automation across the value chain of software, it just makes every organization more efficient over the long run. It saves so many resources. And once people kind of see that light, they're all in. They're cooking with oil. They're making it a priority. And that's where we see the most success with folks. And I use this as an example, but there's plenty others. But when someone sees it in action, that's generally where you start saying, okay, we're going to change our process. We're going to change our workload resourcing, and we're going to make those organizational changes that shift your culture to this more modern approach.
Very good. Yeah. So you can't go anywhere without hearing two letters, AI. Right. That seems to dominate a lot of the airwaves, or even in print, and so that's clearly the hot buzzword today: AI, agentic AI, Gen AI, LLMs, blah blah blah. But let's talk about that maybe in the context of testing. So, from your perspective, what role is AI actually playing in the test environment right now? Is it delivering any value?
I think we're in the. I don't want to say we're in the infancy of it. I think it changes so fast, and expectations change so fast with what AI can do. I think doesn't matter if you're working at your employee. As consumers, we see things like Chat GPT. We see these models that you can use on your phone or on your laptop or your iPad, whatever. And people want that experience at work as well. So I think what we're starting to see as we get into agentic AI and these AI models get better and better from a testing perspective, we're looking at we have co-pilots and different types of tools here at Tricentis where we're actually helping. We already are no code testing tool, right? It's no coding. It's low code, no code. Whatever buzzword you want to call it, but we don't code, right? That's the values, no scripting. Our AI that we're implementing now and we're investing in and we're rolling out. We've just rolled out one new feature of agentic AI, but helping you build those test cases faster, right? Right now, it's pretty fast to build a test case in Tricentis. AI is going to make it even faster because it's going to see what you've already done and tell you to do something different and make it better, right? Or it's going to potentially, we're looking at having it do it for you, right? That's where we're looking at from a roadmap perspective. I think the challenge you're going to see with AI, not just in the testing environment, but number one, garbage in, garbage out. Your model's got to be good. You got to train the model the right way, and that's where we say for like data integrity testing, you got to make sure 1 = 1 across your IT ecosystem. Testing is no different, right? We test that, right? We do that right now, and we're getting better and better at it. I would say that from our software testing AI type approach, it's really of where can we simplify and make this AI take some of that cognitive load and some of that other workload off of the folks that are managing these things. So think updating test cases, right? The way we do it, we have a model-based approach, and we do use AI, but our AI is getting better and better. Now we're anticipating changes based off of patches, based off of introduction of new inputs. So say you add a new software that's providing data that feeds an ERP, that will update that test case to automatically ensure that data point's included. So that's where we see our AI going. It's getting better and better at test case development, test case management, right? And then predictions or intelligence that says, here's where you're going to fail at scale. And that's, I think, where from a testing perspective will be most important as we go forward.
Yeah, and no, I appreciate that. As you were talking, I was thinking just about a couple of other words that I hear that come up when we start talking about AI and in this space, and I think there's some confusion maybe on the terms that people use. Right, when we talk about testing, and we use the term test automation, and then I think there's some people who might confuse that as well with this concept of RPA, robotic process automation,
Yeah.
and I think those are two different things. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you guys look at the differences, and why, for folks who can get those two confused, the differences between those two things, and maybe how they should be thinking about it.
Sure. Yeah, RPAs are great. They're an awesome tool. They save a ton of time. They take traditional workflows and automate them. But here's the catch: you still have to test the workflow. And an RPA is not a testing tool, right? It's not integrated in with the CI/CD pipeline. It isn't, purposely built to test those workflows. It's there to execute those workflows. So we integrate very well in it. If you look at it from a solution standpoint, if I'm putting in automation, I want to automate the testing process so that when I go to production, my RPA works, right? And so those are, in my opinion, and I think Tricentis' opinion, there's two very different things. Where we kind of see our AI going is when we talk about the AI is, yeah, we'll help build those test cases out, cut that time down, and then as you go to production, the RPA is going to execute that workflow that we've already said, hey, this is the way it should work. We validated that it did work. It goes, and here how it works at scale. If you put it in RPAs and you're automating those tasks, you have to test those tasks at scale. You have to test that the data, the inputs are accurate. Otherwise, the RPA is going to execute whatever you told it to do with the bad data, or it will break because there's too much going on. There's too much network traffic. There's applications overloaded. So we look at RPA as a great tool to automate your environment for business process execution. We look at automation of software testing as a great tool that integrates in with a total automation strategy where you're testing everything up front, validating it works, and now you're off to the races with RPA.
Fantastic. So as we get close to time here, I'm curious if you could give one piece of advice to agency leaders that are trying to modernize their test infrastructure. What would it be? And then on top of that, for people trying to get started, how should they get started with their test automation journey?
Yeah, I think you have to do a little bit of again, I'll get back to, you got to see yourself. If you're looking to implement software test automation and even going down and, like we talked about, RPAs, integrate all these modern technologies, you got to look and see what's there, what's staying, right? What legacy tools are not going to go anywhere anytime soon, where you're trying, what you're trying to implement, and understand what that vision is. If you can identify your vision and the outcome you're trying to achieve up front, it makes your project tasks and it makes your critical path achievable. It makes it so that the organization understands where you're trying to go. And it creates a sense of unity of effort, right? And which is probably the most important thing about implementing any automated process or technology is that unity of effort. We always recommend, like I said, see yourself, understand how you work now, understand how you want to work, communicate that message, and then prioritize, right? You can't do everything at once. It's too hard. People have too many things going on. So we try to say, let's just bite it off in chunks. What is your number one goal? You want to do test automation. Okay, how do you manage it right now? Let's show you how to, here's a better way to manage it than maybe what you're doing right now. Okay, now we're ready to go automate it, right? So I think it's not necessarily baby steps. It's having the honest conversation to say, yes, we can implement this, but we need to implement it right. So measuring twice and cutting once is always the best way. Take your time, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that is how I think we see the most successful organizations in the federal government achieve, 50, 60, 70% software test automation.
Slow is smooth. That sounds like a line from the F1 movie, but it's a great quote. I appreciate you taking the time, Adam. I guess any last parting words of wisdom for us?
No, I think, we kind of hit a lot of the main topics. I think what's exciting with coming down the line, especially at Tricentis, shameless plug, But our kind of AI strategy, we'll be putting more and more information out. We try to put it out on all the different platforms, and have stuff on YouTube and LinkedIn. But I think where we're going with software test automation from an AI and agentic AI perspective is something to look for, because I'm not aware of other organizations in the industry that are taking our approach. The other piece is, I think, again, I go back to organizations must look at software test automation early and often versus after the fact, because we do work with some customers who did it after the fact and it was an emergency. It doesn't need to be an emergency. This is something that is a, we talked about, it's cultural change, organizational management change, but it's for the better, and it yields better results. We're talking about results of deploying 40, 50, 60% faster than traditional methods, talking about cutting costs millions of dollars year over year. And that's because in the past, it's all been manual. Those are hours burned, and those hours burn add up really fast. So I think if we could, that's a long-winded last parting word, but the last long-winded parting word would be simple: is, give us a shout. We'll help you see yourself. We got experts standing by that can say, hey, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, and understanding that up front and then going into implementation.
Fantastic. Well, Adam, again, thanks for joining us. And for those of you listening in, a special thanks to Adam Rosenbaum from Tricentis. We covered a lot of topics, ERP modernization, AI, DevSecOps culture, and full testing automation. So again, for those listening in, thanks you. And until next time, this is Chet, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks.